So our next speaker is one whom I would describe as a nearly superhuman power plant in the shape of, and I'm going to quote her, a climate freak by heart, a political economist by training, and an entrepreneur and policy advocate by practice. As a former intrapreneur with Maersk shipping conglomerate, she spearheaded the industry with the introduction of 3D printing. And she was appointed special advisor to a nationwide additive manufacturing hub in Denmark. She has been selected as a leader of tomorrow by the St. Gallen Symposium for 3 consecutive years, appointed member of the Roundtable Industry 2030 by the European Commission, as well as appointed to Denmark's Green Growth Team by the Danish government, to name just a few of her many merits. She is co-founder of Nordic think tank and consultancy Dare Disrupt, and we are extremely excited to have her here today. Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Märtha Rehnberg.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. It's very special and almost emotional to be back in the maritime industry. It was my first real job to be at Maersk, and so always very special to come here. So thank you so much for having me. Now, what I learned in the maritime industry, oh my God, so many things. But one thing that really disrupted me was that people spoke about the maritime industry as a very conservative industry. Do you recognize that? Yes. But working from within, I learned that some of the major high-tech stuff actually comes from the maritime industry. Some of the most cutting-edge machine learning algorithms I have still seen to date come from the maritime industry. Now, what happened with 3D printing, back when I was called a 3D printing girl in shipping, also some of the most cutting-edge stuff comes from the maritime industry. Now, so it seems there's a disconnect, maybe connected to the maritime industry feeling it's like the silent hand of the global economy, so we're not very extroverted with these inventions. And so I really hope that you want to lean forward with me and start to be extroverted about the brilliance of this industry and the potential of this industry. Now, what keeps drawing me back to this industry is that you dare to look long-term. And it seems to be that in this wild era we live in, that thinking long-term and kind of taking a step back and like, wow, it's wild. It's wild to be human now. We're like at the cusp of the exponentials across the board, aren't we? Do you feel this? The exponentials of tech that we've talked about for so long, now we're here. Not to mention the exponentials of Mother Earth, now we're here and we feel them. So taking a step back is a little bit what I wanted. I tend to dare disrupt, so I quit my job in Maersk because I got so disrupted by how fast things were going, and I understood that we didn't have the tools with which to embrace this future, and that's the purpose of Dare Disrupt that has now existed for about 10 years, to find those tools. But it seems like every industry has to take a step back now and think about not the future of my industry, but what is the future of the human? And from that reverse engineer what needs my industry to do in order to support the future human that we want to create, that we want to be. Now, this summer, I think, has been daunting for all of us. I chose to spend my summer to discuss with some of the most brilliant climate scientists of the world, and this is where I'm going to start my talk. So I'm going to start with the bad news, and then I'm going to end with the good news, okay? Bear with me, but it's getting a bit bad before. So the talks I've had over the summer have been with the likes of Adil Najam, who wrote the IPCC report in 2007, and his team got the Nobel Peace Prize back then for excellent communication. And he told me, you know, there's absolutely no science now, to date, that we will make the 2 degrees. And so the latest science is even that we'll make 1.5 degrees already between next year and 2027. And we're already starting to feel how crazy and wild the planet is right now. Current member state and current promises from our nation states is that what if we kind of mount up to what those promises say, we're heading towards a world of 2.8 degrees. And so I've been in the climate mitigation space for quite some time, but this summer and this year I've dedicated to climate adaptation. So how does the world actually looks if we don't make the 2 degrees, even 2.8, or even far beyond, if we don't make those promises? So it's been a daunting summer, and I'm just going to check in with if you have the similar social media feed. This is also one of the things that draws me to maritime, is that you are thinking about sustainability, perhaps because you're thinking about the long term. So has anybody else seen these things in their social media feed? Small text. I'll try to kind of give you a little bit. All the thick lines that we're seeing is the mean average for 2023, and it's for different settings. So top quadrant here we have fires burning. Down here, Antarctic sea ice extent anomaly. Then we have the Antarctic sea surface temperature. So here, 2023, what a wild year. So I'm deep in the science, and then when I go out of the house, kind of met with the realities of it. Do you feel this feeling as well? Kind of, yes, it's a wild era. And now, if we lose all of the Antarctic sea ice, we are heading towards a 60-meter sea level increase, according to NASA, right? So it's not within our lifetime, but if all of this accelerates, maybe happening sooner than we think. Another daunting conversation I've had this summer is with the foreign minister of Tuvalu. This is Simon Kofe, who is my idol, the most badass person I have met to date. Tuvalu is the first nation that will disappear completely if we don't make the 1.5 degrees. And again, nothing points that we will make it. So Tuvalu is an entire nation that's about 4.5 meters above sea level, and they're preparing for a future where that entire nation disappears. Now, why are we laughing talking about those things? So when I ask him, how do you maintain sanity in this world of climate injustice, because they have done nothing for the climate crisis, right? He talks about community, and he says it's all about community. And I think this is also why an event like this is so important, that you come back to every year, and the maritime industry building a community that thrives on what he says, vulnerability. To use the real emotions that we're feeling, not look away from them, but use them as a catalyst for change and a driver for change. And so this is something that we really bring with us. Now, the community that I work with, my community, is a community of techies. And I worked with them for about 10 years, and I've seen this shift now, which is so incredibly inspiring, that they are taking all these daunting exponentials and they're using it in the lab to change the history of tech. So when we look into the era of high tech, this is the history we have to move beyond. Now, you will get all my slides if you want. I see there's some small text, I'm sorry about that, but maybe you've seen them before. They were in the IPCC report. It's the Great Acceleration. Here, on this side, we see all the socioeconomic figures. So while we've had global GDP growth, which is the very top one in the middle, this is the impact on our biosphere, right? So this is ocean domesticated land on the rise, exponential, marine fish capture exponential, and lost sea exponential, nitrogen, NOx, SOx. Now this is your area as well, right? So these are the real exponentials, and when we look into an era of high tech, and if we love tech like I do, this is the history we need to change. And these are the technologies that I nerd in every day. And they're so exciting because we really have behind all of these technologies an opportunity for an alternative, radical future. And what I look for in this is not only which buttons to push where, but which buttons they push in us. What I'm equally excited about is not what the technology do, but the stories that they represent. So I dig deep for the visions with the power of pull that can attract communities and galvanize radical change. But the scary part is that we can use all of these technologies to do exactly what we've always done. And this is really the crossroads we're in. It can go really well, and it can go really bad if we just keep doing everything we've always done. Now, the way that I've thought about tech it comes from about 10 years ago. I read this article called "Are Inventions Inevitable?" And it's from 1922, more than 100 years old, and it blew my mind. Written by William Thomas and Dorothy Ogburn. And they mounted out 150 different technologies where they found that they have inventors that exist in different places of the world, but that these inventions have been invented about the same time by inventors in different places in the world that never ever have spoken to each other. So things like, it can get pretty nerdy. I'm trying to see if I can read this small text. I'm going to go here instead. Molecular theory was invented by Ampere and Avogadro in 1814 and 1811. We have the telephone by Bell in 76 and Gray in 76. So different inventors in different places of the world finding out the same thing at the same time. Now this is almost some new age stuff going on. Einstein might call this quantum entanglement later. What they said is that it's all about culture. And so when we look about the future, what is human in an age of high tech, we need to understand everything about culture. Because culture is what drives the change, right? The evidence presented of independent duplicate origins of inventions brings out forcible the importance of the cultural factor in the production of inventions. So I've been looking at, okay, so where are we now? What are those inventions going to hit? What is the culture that is driving the future? And one of the places I go to is the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. Has anybody been or heard of or followed? Here in the front, yes. So you like it? Yeah, pretty cool. So this year I waited with excitement. What is it that we've invented as a collective? Like, this is the best brains in the world that use these amazing exponential technologies, and what are the visions they put forth for humanity? We're going to start with LG.
Today, my mood is red.
Okay, so 2023, the world is burning, and they think that we want to party with our refrigerator. The new breaking thing this year is electronic ink, and you can actually program your refrigerator to the different mood you're in. So if you're in a party mode, put your refrigerator in a party mode. That's LG. Let's look at BMW. They also are very fascinated about electronic ink. Here is what we have for them.
I am more than a car. I am your ultimate companion. This is how we reimagine tomorrow.
So this car can change in 32 different colors. And the idea is that when you're driving in traffic and you are having different moods that day, you would want to show your mood to the rest of the people driving around you. So that's the emotional car. Yeah? Excited? And they have this huge campaign with Selma Hayek and Schwarzenegger to kind of showcase this is the way that they, quote unquote, reimagine the future. Okay, so some disconnect about the problem havers and the solution havers. It's not only the big players. Let's take a couple of more. We have startups like this one who's developing a new version of the Corona mask, a soundproof mask, so that when you sit and work in the train next to your son or daughter who is gaming, and they are screaming because they're gaming very loudly, apparently that's what kids do, they scream when they game, you're not disturbed because it's fully soundproof. And so a startup, it costs about $100,000 to come to the Consumer Electronics Show when you look at the full ticket. So somewhere a VC investing in those said, you know, yeah, spend those money on going there. And we have another contender, also a startup, Meat Block, and this is a crossing between a cutting board and a screen so that you can cut up your vegetables whilst looking at the ingredients and the recipe list at the same time. And the next caveat here is that you do it in community. So you invite your friends and your family, and you can actually eat with them as well. You just put the dock there and you discuss how this experience was. When you are done, make sure to separate the screen from the cutting board when you are washing it, and then recharge it, because apparently everyone wants to have this huge thing on their kitchen top. Excited? So I'm still in the bad news part of my talk, and this is what we're seeing, right? So whilst we want to look at the science, we also don't want to look at the science, and we think still we can innovate ourselves out of the problem, out of climate change, and we still think that this lone of human party on the earth can continue. So when we look at energy revolutions that I understand you did this morning, we need to be mindful of the fact that our minds are not following the evolution, the technological development. And the green energy revolution risks to just be this layer on top of all the other energies. We have still not seen any energy revolution that has led to less consumption of energy. It's only led to more. So we've seen energy intensity go down, which is great, but the absolute consumption has gone up. Now, what we're looking towards, and this is what I work with in Brussels with policymakers, is how can we steer our economy towards one that incentivizes absolute decoupling. Now, this is a bit nerdy. This is a rabbit hole for you to dig into if you want. But what we've managed to do as a collective with tech is to decrease the amount of CO2 in the global economy per dollar with about 34%. Okay, so for every dollar in the economy, the CO2 has decreased with 34%. This is great. But in an economy that is growing in absolute term, during this 50-year span, the CO2 in the atmosphere has increased with 300%. So the same thing, when you're in the maritime industry, you might calculate how you're decreasing the CO2 per container. But what about looking at the entire organization in absolute terms? What about looking at the entire industry? And this is what we need to make happen, and where tech is both a friend and a foe. So I think what statistician Edward Wilson here says is pretty spot on to the timing we're in. The real problem of humanity is the following. We have Paleolithic emotions from the Stone Age, medieval institutions, and then we have these godlike technologies. So there's something about retrofitting ourselves, our minds, our spirits maybe, to this era. And one thing that I look towards, which makes me really excited, is this generation. I'm not saying it's all dependent on them, but there's a real shift going on. So they're inheriting the largest ecological debt we've ever seen throughout history, but also the largest amount of wealth we've ever seen. Now, millennials are inherited about 60 to 100 trillion US dollars, and the way that I like to think of them, we can read in all kinds of values into this generation, but the way that I've seen them and the way that I work with them is Greta Thunberg's, but with money. But with money. This could be really scary or exciting at the same time. Double-clicking on this generation, some of the signals that we see after the pandemic, the Great Resignation, highly educated people, about 40 million in the US, some say even 70 million, that quit their jobs because they want to work for purpose over profit. They want to recalibrate their lives. Now, they don't want ownership, they want access. totally different metric of growth. Now we're heralding growth as a success criteria, but they're looking at immaterial growth, right? A workforce that wants to work for purpose, not profit, about 90% of them, and a generation that is not only in the high-income countries of the West, but we've seen this globally after the pandemic, this generation of consumers in places like India, they're willing to choose a brand that is more sustainable but less known, about 60% of them. Now, my final signal might be a bit nerdy and a bit weird, but this is how you scout for the future. You take signals at the edge and you play with them, what if? Now, this generation buys twice the amount of houseplants. What does this mean? A generation that I see falling in love and wanting to fall in love with nature at a deeper level. Now, they don't want to master nature. They want to use nature as this 4 billion-year-old R&D department that already has the solutions for all of us, that just want to use tech to reverse engineer the solutions Mother Earth has kept secret for so long. So this generation will look like energy and say, you know what, there's the solution is in nature. Instead of these solar panels where we use conflict materials, and etc., well, it's nature's way of using energy or creating energies by photosynthesis. Much smarter. So let's cover an entire building in algae-based panels and have it fully carbon neutral. This building exists in Hamburg. Or it's a generation that looks towards the future of computing and says, okay, so what is the best way to compute information? That's also found in nature. And that's in our DNA. Turning towards our DNA to compute. The National Genome Institute went together with the New York Library to see if they can fit all of the information in the National Library into one drop of DNA, and they succeeded during the pandemic. Are you with me still? It becomes a bit wacky. Bless you.
No, I said yes.
Okay, yes. And the big players like Microsoft decided they want to move into this era because they know that the classical heavy data centers way is not the future. But it's not only the big players, again, it's the small players like this artist, Cyrus Clarke, that I work with in Copenhagen. He has this vision of growing your own cloud. He wants us to have forests that are data centers that capture CO2 and store the data. The project that he has this summer is to think about how to ask for consent for a plant to store one's data in the plant. And he works with this biohacker also from Copenhagen who managed to use this technology to store her favorite Spotify playlist in that very plant. Okay, so how does this all relate to you? Now, the way that I work with the future is, again, not only about what the technology can do, but the buttons they push in us. And what are those stories of the future that have the power of pull? Now, what futurists call the sociology of expectations or the performativity expectations is basically fancy words for saying our visions about the future actually have a performative effect on our actions in the present. So how can you build visions about the future that are attractive enough that they attract talent, the best brains that want to be part of that vision? And after talent, the capital follows. And when the capital follows, you have the self-fulfilling prophecy of these visions actually realizing. And it all starts with having what a quantum biologist, Nikolai Sorgenfrey-Blum, told me once when I asked him, how are you creating these visions that were in the beginning you're laughed at and then you end up being right? He did that with genomics, he's doing that now with the microbiome project, and he told me, you know what, Märtha, I don't suffer from katagelophobia. Katagelophobia is the fear of being ridiculed. And how can we not suffer from katagelophobia? Because it does start with wacky signals at the edge, be it biocomputing or something different. And then all of a sudden, maybe we don't feel exponentials, but cultures can change exponentially. Just look at this beautiful PR campaign from the 60s. Exxon at the time called Humble. They wanted to show how much energy they had, the energy capacity of the organization. So they bragged about, Humble supplies enough energy to melt 7 million tons of glacier. Yes! Yes! Now, they've done well to try to hide this, but I found this commercial. It's from the 60s. So, in this era, I just want to end up with, I feel it's about something about embracing paradoxes, because this era is wild. And it seems like we need to hold many truths to be a human in the age of high tech. And the first paradox is something that we're very good at in the European Union. We have something called the precautionary principle and the innovation principle. It basically says we need to innovate and test, but we have to have ethics by design. And the way that we do that is to build systems, innovation systems, that learn and unlearn in tandem with science, that have short feedback loops. This might be tough for the maritime industry. Tech, the paradox is about sometimes it's biocomputing, sometimes it's the craziest high tech, but sometimes it's low tech or even no tech. And how you will find out which is which might be by incentivizing absolute decoupling, and then from that find your answer, not relative decoupling. And finally, how do we hold the paradox of having both a radical, diligent, compliant mindset, which is our left brain, you need to be science-informed, you need to live up to the taxonomy and sustainable finance, etc., control. And then you need to be radically creative, creating those visions with power of pull, almost thinking and working like an artist. And here I invite you to do that by having representation by design. You're inviting a diverse set of people into your innovation lab. And at the center, building a culture that does not have catagalophobia. Catagalophobia, should we say it out loud? Catagalophobia? Catagalophobia. Catagalophobia. Okay, good. It needs to land a little bit. All right, so I hope that was something to bring with you, and if not, if something is unclear, I do not disappear from this earth. I am in Copenhagen based, but I also have an email, and I would love to continue the conversation with you. Thank you so much for having me.